Welcome back to the AI Ripple Effect podcast, everybody. And today we're lucky enough to be joined by Rob Parrish, who is the president and owner of FGN Global Logistics. Welcome to the podcast, Rob.
Thank you very much, Adrian.
Great pleasure to have you here. Why don't you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and your background and what FGN Global Logistics do and who you serve from a customer base?
My background is primarily in logistics, so actually exclusively in logistics. 30 years. I started out as a U.S. Marine Corps logistics officer and then went into the freight forwarding industry in the U.S., then transferred to Europe, spent 10 years various freight forwarding companies and air express companies in Europe, and then back to the United States, C-level manager at BDP International, which was at the time the largest independent privately owned freight forwarder in the U.S. And when I was about 40, I got the entrepreneurial bug. That was sort of during .com. I started SaaS solution for freight forwarders, but at the time we didn't call them SaaS, but it was essentially a cloud-based freight forwarding solution, which I sold to a company called Global Logistics Technologies and took a position there. And then that eventually got sold to Oracle. So Global Logistics Technologies is the TMS of Oracle. Then I started a business process outsourcing company with a partner, and we did back office work in India for logistics companies. That was a very short project because the BPO business got very popular very quickly. There were a lot of startups, and then it turned out to really be a scale-oriented business. And so there were a lot of acquisitions. We sold the business there. Then I started FGN Global Logistics as a freight forwarder, but using essentially Web 2.0 technology at the time. So Web 2.0, generally refers to, in my mind, SaaS solutions and sort of flexible internet-based solutions. And at the time, Google had come out with a marketing concept saying that they were encouraging people to treat Chrome as an application. They said the browser, they kept on saying the browser is the application. Right. And what that really meant to me was they invented tabs. They put tabs into the browser, and that meant that you could have multiple SaaS solutions on one browser, and therefore you could much more efficiently construct a logistics platform using multiple SaaS solutions. We did that, and that really kind of changed the cost structure of a freight forwarder. So systems costs went way down, communication costs went way down, and my goal was to create a freight forwarding business model where the employees retained a higher level of expense in the business, and the technology and the communications took less of the expense. And that would allow you to hire a more qualified and not necessarily experienced, but a higher level of employee. You could pay them more money and you'd get a better employee, and you gave them a good platform to work with. And then on top of that, what I did was I focused on a freight forwarder that overcame one of the challenges we had when I was building the SaaS solution for forwarders, which was something called functionality bloat, which is essentially the problem of those SaaS solutions where essentially all the freight forwarders are supporting different kinds of supply chains. So they have to customize the platform for each forwarder depending on what kind of business they have, the customers they have, because supply chains are all not the same. The problem I had with my SaaS solution was that, every time I got a new customer, I had to do a bunch of new programming to support the complexity of that particular system that had to support the particular supply chains.
Each time you had a new customer?
Yeah. And that's been a problem with the freight forwarding systems since 1980s. So my goal was to focus on a market that was essentially just one kind of shipment. And what that was, I discovered a technology that turned a 20-foot container into a tank. And that's called a Flexitank. And a Flexitank is a bladder that goes inside a 20-foot container, 6,000 gallons. It's essentially ships the same amount of liquid as a ISO tank, but it's disposable, and therefore it's one directional. It works just like a full container load shipment on an ocean carrier, as opposed to an ISO tank, which is essentially an asset that is managed by an asset management company, not a freight forwarder. The big ISO tank companies are really managing fleets. They're not managing shipments. They do manage shipments now. Previously, even 15 years ago, they outsourced the shipment part of the process. Now they do it internally, but previously They didn't even do that. And then on the Flexitank side, the way the business was configured when I got into it was invented by a Brit who was trying to find a solution for shipping wine cheaply.
Sure.
They came up with a polyethylene bladder that goes inside a 20-foot container. And essentially that company was a manufacturer of that bladder. It wasn't a transportation company. Basically, there were two incumbents in the industry when I got into it, and they were mostly just manufacturing the tank. They were doing some other logistics management. They were doing some trucking related to it, and they were providing the tanks in, delivered to the customers. But they weren't full-fledged door-to-door international freight forwarding companies that ship bulk liquid. And I looked at it and I said, that's just a package. What this industry needs is a transportation company that's a one-stop shop for the whole thing. Right. I mean, previously, if you were a customer, you went to the tank manufacturer, you went to your trucker, you found a freight forwarder, and you cobbled the whole thing together.
Yeah.
But within that process, there's a lot of room for error. And it is specialized enough so it makes sense to make one company responsible for the whole thing. So we started bringing to market a full service solution like that, and it developed over time. And basically that's how all of the Flexitanks moved today. We then extended our service into the isotank space with a little bit of a different model there. We act as a 3PL, and we manage other people's fleets, and we do our best to find available isotank inventory that's underutilized and benefit from that by being a forwarder that handles isotanks also. That's the kind of development over the 12-year history. It's been a successful business. We're in the place right now where we've been primarily an American company, a U.S. export company for our history, but we are now expanding internationally. We are opening up in Singapore in September. We are looking at acquisitions in Europe and South America. And our goal there is not to have a competitor to DHL or Expeditors or some of the leading forwarders. Our goal is to have what we call a light, broad global network where we have regional offices that coordinate shipments for a whole region. If Singapore would be responsible for Southeast Asia, we would have partners in Southeast Asia, but we're trying to benefit from a management entity in a region of the world where we can make the settlement process related to the way freight forwarders make international settlements between each other a more efficient process. That will include using stable coins, which we're very excited about interjecting that into the international settlement process. And then, of course, having somebody on the ground that is able to coordinate sales and marketing between regions of the world. That coordination center would also be responsible for that, and they would handle shipments also.
Got it. And you mentioned Singapore. Have you already got a presence in the Middle East, or is that part of your expansion?
That would be part of the expansion. That's sort of phase two. Phase one is Europe, Southeast Asia, and South America. And phase two would be Middle East, potentially China, and then maybe, countries like South Africa or Australia that are, far away from anything else. And it might make sense to have an entity there just on its own. But that would be longer term.
Really fascinating. And I guess with that holistic global perspective, then you will be in pole position to answer my next question, which is around trends in the market, both domestically in the US, but then also at a global level across, labor markets globally, optimization of cost pressures, efficiency drives, etc. It'd be interesting to hear your views, Rob.
Well, I mean, I kind of look at industries from a Michael Porter Five Forces perspective on one level, and then from a industry maturity perspective. I think it took GE 100 years to go through in the maturity cycle. You probably had some experience there with your Six Sigma background, but the maturity cycle of if you define third-party bulk liquid management services as an industry, which might be a little bit of a stretch because we don't really have that much competition in that area, but certainly the Flexitank industry has matured very quickly. Let's say they invented the Flexitank in 2003. By the present, we're probably at a place where the growth of the, global Flexitank market, which is probably 1 million units. It's actually the same as the isotank market. They're both about 1 million units. That growth, went from, double digits for between 2007 and 2015 as it morphed into a transportation service and our competitors all had double-digit growth. You're seeing that slow down, and therefore you're seeing a consolidation. The two main incumbents in that space merged 3 years ago, and then they got bought by DHL. And what we're seeing is that, the U.S. market for a specialist like us, we're a small company. We can get a couple of new customers, and it affects our growth significantly. But we found that first of all, because of the nature of the products we ship, which are low value added or low value commodities, that a lot of the products that we ship, like chemicals and agricultural products, as they get to a certain level, they move outside of the United States. They go to less developed countries. Very often we see the chemical companies will sell off a particular division because the ROI on that particular product isn't good enough, so they send it to Brazil or India. The growth of the Flexitank market in the U.S. is low. It's higher in other places of the world. We want to take advantage of that. But there's also network effects for any forwarder, because of the way international products are bought and sold. If you have a presence on both ends of the transportation transaction, which is both ends of the sales transaction, you're twice as likely to be able to close the business as if you're just at one end.
Makes a lot of sense. And in your own sector within logistics and more broadly, what's your take on AI as a positive catalyst for change or as a negative disruptor of a stable industry?
Well, that sort of depends on how you approach it. I think in the medium term, it's disruptive. It's much more disruptive than anything we've seen in the past. I've always been watching. I kind of look at technology development in 4 steps, and because of my age and when my career started and to the present. We had .com, which had a big impact on logistics. And it had obviously had a big impact on the whole, economy, but it was a very big impact on logistics. And then we had Web 2.0, which I don't think had that big a impact on logistics. It allowed me to build the model that I was looking for. Personally, it had a very much bigger effect. Then we had blockchain, which everybody thought was going to be huge. It turned out to be nothing, essentially. And now we have AI. Each one of those iterations, I think a lot of people, including myself, thought that this is the big disruptor. This is going to disintermediate the broker that stands between the buyer and the seller. Yeah. And this is dangerous to us. And each time, the forwarders figured out a way not to be disrupted. And very effectively, there continues to be a very strong need for a forwarder. Forwarders provide solutions. And I don't think the business is going to, with AI, I don't think it's going to disappear tomorrow. No. But if I had to pick one of those 4 to be the ultimate disruptor, we're trying to take advantage of AI faster than anybody else, that we get efficiencies and customer relations that bring advantage to us, that bring financial advantage to the company, and then see where it goes. But we're trying to be ahead of the curve. And I think we've been ahead of the curve the whole time as a freight forwarder. I mean, we don't make a lot of noise, and we're not the Flexport of the world that's raising lots of money and promoting their technology. I have some interesting thoughts about Flexport, but probably not appropriate for this particular discussion. But with us, when we just sort of quietly took advantage of what was available, in SaaS solutions and the model that enabled them, and it's been I think very successful. Our revenue per employee is about 10 times what the public companies have. Now, it's not comparable because it's smaller. We're a smaller company. But, I mean, that does say something. And if you can do 10 times the amount of revenue with one employee than a larger company can, you're probably doing something right.
Is that, Rob, then by inference, the fact that you are able to get that revenue level per employee, is that because you've looked at all those operational processes and applied technology, maybe some AI, to enable those higher acuity resources to focus on customer value? Is that the kind of strategic approach you've taken?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I mean, well, first of all, we took advantage of outsourcing. Right. We essentially outsource anything we can. And that may be counterintuitive for somebody that's in the brokerage space where you want to control as much as you can. But I'll give you a couple of examples. We have a back office in Ho Chi Minh City that does essentially processes. It's the integration arm of our various SaaS solutions. That, right. I mean, we didn't spend a whole lot of money on solutions. They don't all talk the way they should. We've we're addressing that with a new platform that we just rolled out on January 1st, which will be AI enabled, and it will be structured. It's a technology stack that works for AI, which our past multiple SaaS solutions we couldn't do with because there were multiple solutions and they were vended to us by different companies. So we've got the back office, but the back office does more than just integrate. I mean, they essentially set up all the files, they
Right.
audit all the invoices, they do all that kind of work. That's good. And then what we actually also did was during Web 2.0, there was an industry that emerged called the application builder industry. It sounds a lot more fancy than it is. It's basically a web-enabled spreadsheet, but looks like fancy software when a customer looks at it. But essentially what that is, we were looking for ways to do multimodal shipments in North America. So just an example, about 75% of our shipments now that go internationally are originally loaded into rail cars at the plants, and then they ship the rail cars down to our transload centers. We transload to containers. But in that model, we put the transloader, our own platform, and make them manage the shipment, essentially. So our people aren't calling truckers. They're not organizing any of the stuff that takes a lot of hands-on in a freight forwarding situation. They're essentially sitting in front of two screens, or three screens in some cases, with multiple solutions in front of them. They're just managing the process. They're managing by exception. And so that allows us to essentially do a lot more with a lot fewer people. Now, there's two pieces of this. There's the technology piece, and then there's the operational piece. The operational piece, if you can organize the operational piece so that the technology piece doesn't have to be super complicated, then you can actually get productivity gains that are exemplified in our productivity.
I mean, that's a great approach. Sounds like you've got it nailed right to the mass. So that's great. What have been in your evolution as a business? What have been the key milestones that you've encountered, or any challenges you've encountered even, and how have you overcome those up to today?
The first challenge was learning the business, understanding all the dynamics of it. Flexitanks have their own particular requirements when it comes to shipping them, and understanding all those pieces, understanding the risk of it related to them. Because when we started in this, the biggest issue shippers had was, these things are going to leak. It's just a plastic bag. And it goes in a container. So They were concerned about that. So we had to overcome a lot of that. That problem has basically gone away because the tanks, and there's two ways to mitigate risk in our business related to Flexitanks, and that is have a good manufacturer. I will say this, when I started in the business, there were 140 Flexitank manufacturers in the world. It's a very easy kind of business to start. It's light manufacturing. When the technology got to a certain point, a lot of people jumped into it, a lot of people all over the world. So in lesser developed countries, you saw a lot of manufacturing there. Over the past 10 years, that business is consolidated down to essentially 4 manufacturers in one city in China, which, is the tendency politically in the United States. There's a lot of talk about, the Chinese have grabbed off these industries and, used their resources to take advantage of that. We don't need to go into that, but essentially at the same time, they perfected the manufacturing process too, so their quality is very good. You don't have to worry about the tanks, which if there's any risk, it's with the people who are preparing the containers themselves, that kind of stuff. And what we've done over time is we figured out a way to maintain good relationships with those vendors, long-term relationships, train them, make sure that they have all the certifications and training to do the business properly. And it in fact turns out that Flexitanks are safer than isotanks if you just look at the numbers. There are fewer leaks, there are fewer problems. It has something to do with the fact that Flexitanks only ship non-hazardous. Isotanks are shipping some pretty nasty stuff. But by the same token, I think our customers certainly have a much different expectation than they did before. Before it was like, are you managing risk? And now it's how much freight can you move, which that's great for us.
Awesome. And what have you got? I mean, we talked about your phase 1, phase 2 global expansion, but what else is on your horizon for, say, the next 12 months, Rob?
We rolled out, let's talk about technology. And that's the key thing. We're doing two things. We're expanding internationally and we're rolling out an AI-enabled platform. What is that platform? Well, it's a traditional freight forwarding solution as it is today, but it's on a stack that can absolutely handle any AI agent integration and all that. It's an early stage company. Two partners formed it. They were saying exactly the right things as far as I was concerned. They were trying to take advantage of the AI revolution, and they certainly understand it.
Sorry to interrupt, but is this a TMS platform that integrates with AI agents? Did I hear that right?
Well, a transportation management system to me kind of refers to a shipper solution that manages your transportation. I think of a freight forwarding solution being somewhat separate from that. It's similar. Freight forwarding platforms do a couple of things differently. Obviously, they do all the documents that internationally, and, I guess some of the TMSs do that too, but it's really, specifically made for a freight forwarder. The other thing is that it's from a rating and routing perspective, there's a buy side and a sell side. Right. Most TMSs only have the buy side because it's a shipper. The shipper's not responsible for the costs. Then it has a complete financial package integrated into it. Right. And that's absolutely necessary, and it's internationally oriented. So has the finance, has the documentation, and is designed for international. Those three elements make it somewhat different from a standard TMS. And that industry, the companies that make freight forwarding systems are very large. There's one company that is very old. This technology is written in Fortran. It's been around forever. People are still using it, but it's been, it's sort of like George Washington's axe. 3 new heads and 4 new handles. I mean, it's hardly what it used to be.
Yeah.
But then there are other bigger companies. There's a company out of Australia that sort of consolidated a whole bunch of companies. There's a company up in Canada that does it, that pretty much services the bigger companies. And then there's probably 4 or 5 smaller companies that serve the smaller end of the market. I mean, the concentration ratio of the freight forwarding industry is about probably 60% of the volume is in the top 20 forwarders, and 40% of the volume is in the other 25,000, right?
Right.
And so there are companies in Singapore, the companies in the US that serve that smaller market. But anyway, the company that we chose was a startup, a couple of really smart guys, one guy from Yahoo, another guy from SNC or TC, whatever that is. Good guys. We were one of the earliest customers. I mean, I think we were the 3rd customer, and we're helping them build it out, and we're doing it as a kind of a partnership at this point. I think there's a very good chance that we could get much closer than just partners on this, because one of the things about the freight forwarding industry is you have a value based on basically transactional revenue. We believe that the way the industry is going, that you have to control the technology and therefore get IP value. I mean, when I talk to people who are interested in buying the company, not that I'm interested in selling, but people, as you know, having been in the PE market, there's a lot of people calling you all the time. Right? The second thing they ask you is, do you control the IP? And traditionally, forwarders haven't. I mean, they really haven't. And it's an opportunity lost. If you do control the IP to some extent, in some way, shape, or form, it's going to help you with your evaluation. So
it's a great
looking at that too.
I agree. And that tech rollout is happening, and you're engaging on that partnerial basis with that organization. And is there a set of milestones you're looking to achieve over the next 12 months with that?
Yeah. So, so we rolled it on January 1st. We'd been working on it for about probably 8 or 9 months prior to that. We're really building it from scratch in a sense. And then, so we got the finance and the operational module rolled out on January 1st. Our goal is to have the CRM piece finished by the end of this month. And then part of that, but separate, what we consider separate module, is the rating and routing piece.
Okay.
It's a pretty big challenge. We actually thought about outsourcing that, but then we decided not to. So we're building that. That can be just rating a shipment, or it can be shipment optimization. It can be route optimization. It can be a lot of things. That's a step-by-step thing that's going to take some time. We'll have the basics. And we have this in another system today. It's not like we're not able to do it. It's just not integrated. I mean, the real challenge is this. I've always had this vision of something that I call the black box, which basically means someone asks you how much a shipment costs, and with no human intervention, the shipment is created, it's quoted, created, managed, and shipped.
Got it.
Okay, now that's not a realistic thing in the next 2 years, but a lot of those pieces are. You're able to automate a lot of those pieces with AI now. Just give you an example. One of the big problems with automating the full process is the carriers are never going to, the carriers have been way behind on the technology development. Now, I will say they're getting a lot better. I mean, they really are. I could give it to them. They made a lot of progress.
Yeah.
But if you're a small, if you're just a, random freight forwarder in the United States, you can't get an API connection so that you can book online. You can do it through third parties in some cases, but it may be expensive. They may not even be interested. They want to talk to the big multinational that's got 5 million full container loads of paper pulp. That's their optimal customer. But with AI, you can go in and scrape the website that these carriers now have. And so we've done an analysis on how many individual pages you have to go through to make a booking, say, on MSC, and whether an AI agent can handle that. And we believe that's possible. That's one of the bigger challenges, in this automation of this whole process. But for starters, our system is reading emails at this point. If a vendor invoice comes in, what would happen in the past would be that we would use the email system to make it appear that they're sending the email to the account manager, operations manager. Well, in fact, it goes to Vietnam, and they don't know that. They don't see that because of the way the system's set up. Vietnam audits the invoice, makes sure everything's correct, checks it against the rating system, and then enters it into the financial system as an expense. That part, we are in the process of automating that with AI at this point, where AI just says, yeah, that's fine. It meets the criteria, builds the expense into the system, and then we have that in the financial system automatically. So
it's automated accounts payable, essentially, I guess.
We also, in this process, we switched banks because our big money center bank, Wells Fargo, wasn't very flexible in terms of how you could integrate for AP. And we went to a smaller bank that was a little more forward thinking about how you can integrate into their system with AP so that the AI acknowledges the payable, and then the banking system recognizes it as a legitimate payable and then just pays it. But in our process, the AP process in our company is a part-time job of somebody. There's really not a lot to it.
Rather than having a team of X doing it previously, it's now...
they had a whole finance department of people, shuffling paper around. We've never had paper. I'll just tell you one quick story. I started my freight forwarding business at the Fritz Companies, which was a big customs broker in the United States. They became a global freight forwarder. They sold themselves to UPS. They're basically UPS Supply Chain Solutions is the old Fritz company. Right. And Lynn Fritz was kind of a visionary. He was definitely a visionary. And I remember when I was just out of the Marines and I was at my first conference, and he said, someday this business is going to be done without any paper and from one place in the world. I just remembered that. And when I started this company, I was like, okay, one place in the world, which isn't that part's not going to, isn't true, but we've been one place to this point. And paperless. We've been paperless and digital since 2012.
Awesome.
Yeah, all PDFs. I'll tell you, when I first started the business, I hired people with experience and couldn't convince them not to try to control everything themselves. I stopped hiring people with experience and I just hired people who were smart and of good character, and then I paid them more than they could make anywhere else. And that has been a very successful model. But in the early stages, people were just used to having files and paper and stuff. I used to walk around and take the piece of paper off their desk and say, "What's this?" And they'd say, "Oh, well, that's the the order for some shipment. It's in the system. Why do you have this piece of paper?" And I think some of the people thought I was kind of obnoxious, and I probably was. We've never had phones on the desks. We've always had mobile phones from day one. The desks are clean. There's lots of screens, not a lot of paper.
Awesome. So streamlining operations and making sure your carbon footprint is as reduced as possible by the lack of paper.
Well, that's a benefit, I guess. But
that's fantastic. Listen, Rob, that's really insightful. It sounds as though you're on the front foot when it comes to the technology revolutions. Where, for people out there interested in getting more information about FGN Global Logistics, where can they go to find out?
Our website is www.fgn. So Frank Gulf Nancy. If you go on LinkedIn and just put in FGN, you'll get all our sales and marketing people, and they'll call you up in a heartbeat. I'll just say one quick thing. I was U.S. Marine. In the Marine Corps, they have a saying, which is all Marines are a rifleman. Every Marine's a rifleman, which means that even though you're the cook, you can pick up your gun and go to war. You know how to do it. You know how to use it. My mantra in my business has always been everybody's a salesperson. You're thinking about revenue growth. We're a customer-facing entity, and we maintain business because our service is a step higher, because it can be. They're not worried about trying to enter the information I've been in freight forwarding companies where they take home stacks of paperwork to generate invoices over the weekend at their kitchen table. I thought that was insane. Well, first of all, your cash flow is terrible because you're not issuing invoices on time. But second of all, what kind of a life is that? Where you have to, you're working over the weekend, and it's just when you don't have to. Just a little bit of management fix that, and a little technology.
No, it's I think it's the old adage of having the right culture kills strategy every time. So if those people are, indoctrinated in the way that customer comes first, everybody's a salesperson, then that's going to really drive huge benefits, which it sounds though it is. That's brilliant. Thank you very much for coming on and sharing your insights. Brilliant to get those insights. Appreciate it very much. Thank you to everybody out there for joining this episode of the AI Ripple Effect. We will see you in the next episode. But for now, Rob, thanks again.
Well, thank you, Adrian. I appreciate it.